Again, thank you so much for joining us here at the NASA Space Apps Collective Genius Summit. We've had a wonderful day of exquisite programming, and we're so excited to bring you the last session of the day right now. So we heard some awesome lightning talks from our collective cohort earlier today, and I'd love to get us warmed up a bit by having folks type into the chat, if you were here earlier, some insights or some takeaways from the previous lightning talk session. As for myself, I'm really reflecting on what we heard from Carly, one of our collective cohort members, on how her experience with the collective strengthened her as an educator. Her collective project involved creating accessible teaching materials using open source NASA data to teach fundamental concepts in mathematics and astronomy. We heard from Manuel, a collective member who discussed potential advancements in space technologies as a founder of Space Acceleration Industries. Another collective cohort member, Avita, talked about ways that local communities of the future can prepare for, mitigate, and even work towards preventing natural disasters using a tool that she's developed called Preva. Finally, Dr. Simone Legendre closed our session by providing some access to STEM opportunities to the Global South through her company, EduHouse. As I see in the chat, folks are joining from all over the world: Bangladesh, Argentina, Tokyo, and Dr. Pinto note from Los Angeles that STEM is accessible regardless of whether you're good at math and or science. And I couldn't agree more. So thankful for all those insights and from our collective cohort speakers who shared in their lightning talks earlier today. Really quickly, as a reminder of why we're here, the NASA Space Apps Collective is a sister program to the Global Hackathon that occurs just once a year. As a sister program, the Space Apps Collective is invested in year-round engagement with folks, a cohort of individuals that we just heard from in the last session, to build skills, build capacities, and do open science in their communities. As we've done throughout the Genius Summit, we really want to take an opportunity to highlight and celebrate those collective cohort members. And to do so, I want to invite Cynthia to the stage, our global community manager, to spotlight one of our collective cohort members. Cynthia?
Thank you so much, Parker. I am so excited to spotlight our incredible collective cohort members. Up next, we have someone who is really pushing the boundaries of artificial intelligence and machine learning, Kavinash Gupta. For Kavinash, the collective is more than just a place to generate ideas. It's a space where those ideas can be refined, challenged, and turned into action. With a passion for AI and machine learning, he thrives on breaking beyond initial assumptions, pushing through obstacles, and really transforming bold ideas into real solutions that make an impact. Kavinash's journey is a great reminder that innovation isn't just about having an idea. It's about the determination to refine and execute it. The work being done across this cohort is truly inspiring, and we are so excited to see where it leads. With that, I'll pass it back to Parker.
Thanks, Cynthia, and thank you so much to our cohort for joining us tonight and during all of our sessions. Let's take a look at where we are in the schedule and where we're going from here. So as we get started this evening, we're going to finish up with a panel from Dr. Myrle Ballard and Dr. Emily Sylak-Glassman about making a difference through collective wisdom. This concludes our programming for today, but we'll be back bright and early tomorrow for the next day of programming at the Collective Genius Summit. What we'd like to do next is give folks an opportunity to get more familiar with the tech we're using. WebEx is the official platform of the Collective Genius Summit. And let's use the chat feature, the Q&A feature, and the reaction feature throughout our session today to make sure folks are staying engaged. So let's test it out. In the chat, do me a favor, enter your name and where you're joining us from. I'll give you about 30 seconds to enter in that information. I'm curious, where are folks joining from around the world? Wow. We have visitors from Nepal, from Pakistan, from South Dakota, from Canada, from Georgia, the nation, not the state, Denver, Colorado, South Carolina in the United States, South Africa, Argentina, El Salvador, Brazil, Chicago, Illinois in the United States, Ceará. I don't know where Ceará is. What nation is that in? We have folks from Tokyo, more Argentine visitors, Brazil, Paraguay. Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much, folks, for joining from all over the world. For our next prompt, I'm going to ask you to think a little bit more. In one sentence, share something you're hoping are, share something you're excited about learning from this session. Something you're hoping our panelists might discuss. Julia, bienvenidos de España. I'm seeing some awesome hopes come through. Some of them will for sure get to in this panel, connecting diverse talents to respond to the world's challenges, the experiences of diverse people with diverse backgrounds, using spatial data to solve local problems, opportunities to connect with NASA folks. That's what the summit is all about. Well, it seems like we have a good feel for how the chat works. I want to remind folks that the Q&A function in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen will allow you to share questions that in turn we will ask of our panelists when the time is right. Without further ado, let's jump into the panel. In it, we'll be discussing ways that everyday folks can leverage knowledge and wisdom from different arenas to make a difference in our communities. As we hear from these brilliant scholars, again, I invite folks from the audience to use that Q&A function to share some questions for our panelists. We're so lucky to be joined by two experts in this field, Dr. Myrle Ballard and Dr. Emily Sylak-Glassman. Dr. Ballard, Dr. Sylak-Glassman, please join me on stage. I'm so grateful that you are all able to make time to join us today. As we get started, I would love actually if you all could introduce yourselves and tell you a little bit about your work. Dr. Ballard, would you like to get us started?
Yes, good evening. Thank you very much for being on the panel this evening. It's been a long day for me, as I stated, but I want to, the work that I do is very, I think I would say unique, because my research is about Anishinaabe, which is my language. And what I'm doing is I'm using my language to develop baseline indicators regarding water monitoring from the oral history of the Anishinaabe people, indigenous people from way back, and depending on the original naming of spaces and places. We all know that throughout the Americas, around the world, indigenous people name the map the way the map is written with indigenous names. So that's what I'm doing, developing biodiversity indicators based on the baseline baseline indicators from Anishinaabe. And I also used developed 3-eyed seeing, which I'll talk about more, which is the knowledge of which is Indigenous science, Western science, and our relations. And about myself, I'm a Canada Research Chair with the University of Alberta and an Associate Professor. Oh no, University of Calgary, I'm sorry. It's been a long day.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Ballard. Dr. Sylak-Glassman, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, first, let me express my thanks and gratitude. It's a real privilege to get to be with both of you on this panel and to get to be with participants from around the world. Thank you so much for tuning in. And I hope we can, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to answer really any black hole questions. I'll just put that out there right now. But maybe someone else can, and I'm hoping we have a great discussion. So, my name is Emily. I serve as the Deputy Associate Director for Earth Action within NASA's Earth Science Division. I work at NASA headquarters, which is in Washington, D.C., and that's also where I live. It's about 8 p.m. or 8:40 p.m., so it's evening time here. It's also been kind of a long day. So my background is originally in physical chemistry, and I did a PhD in the lab working underground in the dark. and I really wanted to work with people in the sunlight and work collaboratively. And so I transitioned to science policy, where we try to use science to enable good policy decisions and also use the tools of policy to enable great science and science that benefits the community. So that's what I've been doing for the past 10 years. I got involved in NASA through Earth observations, measurements about our home planet. Um, and I feel very lucky we have an incredible mission in the Earth Science Division, which says, compelled by our planet's rapid change, we innovate and collaborate to explore and understand the Earth system, make discoveries, and enable solutions for the benefit of all. I find that incredibly inspiring. It's a great mission to wake up to every day, and I get to work with incredibly smart people from a huge range of disciplines and be a lifelong learner. And that's a bit about me.
Yes, thank you so much. It sounds as though both of you in your work take opportunities to make community action projects sustainable and impactful. And I'm curious, and Dr. Sylak-Glassman, I'd like to start with you. What are the key elements that make projects sustainable and impactful in community?
So it's a really, it's a good and hard question. So maybe I'll just describe a little bit about what sort of work in the Earth Action part of the Earth Science Division we do, and then we can talk a little bit about how we make that sustainable and impactful. So in general, what we do is what we're trying to do is get state and local governments, the private sector, and other organizations to make data-informed decisions using Earth science information. And so we fund research and development for a huge range of decision support applications, tools, and services that take the data from NASA satellites and we'll talk about this, ground-based measurements, really any science information about the Earth, and try to use that to build things that are useful to people. And we also spend a lot of effort trying to build the capacity of individuals and organizations to use Earth science information. So on one hand, we're trying to build the things, and on the other hand, we're trying to build the capacity of people to do things for themselves, right? And we do this through everything from very short-term projects, from having self-paced trainings, to longer-term projects, sometimes 3, 5, sometimes they last a decade or longer. The way we try to work, we have 3 parts to our motto: build bridges, scale, and be user-centered. And I think it's this last part of being user-centered that really gets to sustainability and impact. So we know, so there's a movie that has a famous line, "If you build it, they will come." And it's this idea that we know actually that does not work in Earth science. If you build it, even if it's a really cool gadget, it doesn't necessarily mean anyone's going to use it. And so this is part of where being user-centered comes in, that if we want to have lasting impact, we have to start with what people actually want. And so what we try to do is have the final user of whatever is that's going to be developed start at the very beginning with the scientists to define what it is that they want. And in some cases, it may be that they actually don't want anything new. It's that they want improvements to their existing decision support tool or system. So sometimes it's about improving what's already there. But in a sense, if you don't have that end user buying in from the beginning, it's going to be very difficult to have anything sustained and have that kind of lasting impact. And of course, right, there are also a lot, and this is hard, I think, for us as scientists sometimes. There are a lot of variables that are not under our control in terms of how a community is going to use something, right? There might be policy changes, all sorts of other factors that come into play. And so part of it is understanding the full suite of things that are influencing the end user's decisions and going to be impacting them along the way. Happy to talk more about this as we move on in this discussion.
I think we might ask you to. That was just so rich. Hearing from user-centered design to, I think especially that user-centered design piece really resonates with me, with how to make sure folks are involved from day one, from the first ideation in a project, to ensure that it's used and taken up. Thank you for that, Dr. Sylak-Glassman. Dr. Ballard, I'd ask a similar question. What are the key elements that help community action projects be sustainable and impactful?
Okay, thank you. Regarding the work I do, it's a little bit different from my colleague is doing. My work is working with Indigenous people and working with communities. So my work is about community engagement involving a community, giving communities a voice, and the use of Indigenous science as well. And as well too, when we do community engagement, that means that that it's being done within the community, inside the community. And what's important is a participation with the people, the Indigenous people involved. It's really important to have them participate equally and to have their knowledge of systems want to be treated equal as well. And because we talk about the DEI with human population, we have to respect the DEI within the knowledge systems as well. A lot of people don't do that. A lot of people think Western science is above Indigenous science, but it's not. Indigenous science has been it's been around for a long time, and it's really important to when we do community action, we have to recognize that as a Western trained researcher as well, a lot of the research that we do, we try and fix a problem.
Mhm.
So when we try and fix a problem, it's about what are we going to do to heal, like to heal the land, to heal the atmosphere, to heal the celestial, and whatever exists. And that's what we're constantly doing and finding a solution for healing. Like it's not just us that need healing, and the land needs that as well. The water needs to heal. We talk about global warming, and the air needs to heal, etc. The animals need to heal, and that's the work that I'm doing, and that's what the Indigenous science that I'm using.
I really appreciate you sharing this perspective with us, Dr. Ballard. This notion that the air, the land, the water need to heal really resonates as I think about the world that we live in, that we've inherited, this generation of folks has inherited, that we'll be leaving for our children. I'm thinking, and Dr. Sylak-Glassman, I think I'll pass back to you here. I'm thinking, we learned about this phrase earlier today, citizen science. And another phrase has been floating around, participatory science. Can you help for the folks on the call here now understand what those phrases mean? What is citizen science and what is participatory science?
Sure, and I actually think this ties really nicely to what Dr. Ballard was saying about bringing communities in to do work. So, in my mind, what we're talking about with citizen science and participatory science is enabling people to bring their observations, their knowledge to bear, and combine it with other sources of information to learn something about, in the context I work in, to learn something about the Earth most generally. But within NASA, even, there are lots and different types of projects where if you have some of them, it's if you have a smartphone, you can participate. If you have access to a computer, you can participate. But some of it is if you have a teacher who's willing to work with your classroom, you can participate. And so it's really about, I think, democratizing the ability of anyone to be doing scientific work and to be bringing their different perspectives to bear. And I'll say in earth science, this is particularly important because the measurements that NASA collects largely are from space, that's great. We get this top-down view. We also need observations on the ground, and we need those observations from the bottom up, looking up at clouds, and we need observations of really small things that we can't see from that distance. So it's about bringing together all of that information. So NASA has been a huge proponent of citizen science and participatory science. One, because it enables great things that would be difficult to do otherwise. There are cases where we don't have computer programs that can detect like the human eye in certain cases, or things where we don't have the space-based observations. And so there are tons of different opportunities. And if you go to science.nasa.gov/citizen-science, you can see tons of projects. We have over 30 right now, some ones that I thought might be interesting to the group. There's one for if you're in the United States and you're a middle or high school teacher, your students can test plants for use in space missions. There's one where if you see a landslide or if you hear about a landslide happening in your community, you can report it. And this is a big deal. Landslide modeling is very hard and very important. So the more information we can gather, we can get to better models. There are ones for examining radio signals to help search for intelligent life, dark energy. I did look after seeing in this list to see if there was any black hole challenges. I didn't see one right now, but that doesn't mean there won't be one. And one of the projects I'll give a particular shout out in terms of participatory science is Globe. The website for that is www.globe.gov. And I think the Collective Genius is having an opportunity to hear from the Globe program. Did that already happen?
We've heard from a few folks from Globe already today, and we have a workshop with Globe tomorrow.
Oh, okay. Well, so if you can attend that workshop, please do. I think there are just fantastic ways to get involved in earth science happening all over the world. The Globe teachers are fantastic. The protocols, it's well, you can do really excellent science following these protocols in a really meaningful way. So I think I'll pause there.
Sure. I'm thinking, Dr. Ballard, about the opportunities and challenges that exist with integrating Indigenous knowledge with what we might call Western sustainability practices. And I understand from learning a little bit about your work that you are trained as a Western researcher, as well as having this expertise in Indigenous practices. I'm wondering if you could share some of, from your perspective, what are the opportunities and challenges with integrating these two ways of knowing?
There's a lot of opportunities for those that are willing to braid and weave the two sciences. I don't use the word integrate, because you can never fully integrate the two, but you can use them to complement each other, and that's a difference. And when you use the two together, they're more powerful. There's a lot of, okay, I'm going to stick with the opportunities first. Indigenous science is a new science. It's not new, but it's starting to be accepted. We hear a lot of Indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge, and others. This goes on and on. But they're very different. They're not the same thing. And they're kind of the same concept, but they're different. For example, Indigenous science is about the science of the land, the Indigenous people's science of the land. It's about the science of the water. It's about the science of the trees. It's about the science of the stars. It's about the science of the animals, like for example, wolves, etc. And it's very specific. It's a science of the plants. And for example, I'll concentrate on water because that's where I do a lot of my research on. So the challenges is the challenge is Western science thinks that it's the superior science, the above all science, like the one science that know all of everything, but it's not. Indigenous science complements Western science. Western science complements Indigenous science. For example, water, when there's a lot of flooding, and that's what I did my research on regarding my master's. And I did a lot of research on that when doing regression analysis, et cetera, statistical analysis regarding water. So the modelers have based their decisions regarding these analyses regarding water levels, but they never consulted the indigenous peoples who have knowledge of the water. And the indigenous peoples who have lived there know when the land changes, or when the vegetation changes, and the Western modelers go there to check the land maybe once a year, go back with their notes. But what the indigenous peoples know regarding the land is different from what's being modeled. It's not the same thing, and that's where these two sciences kind of complement each other, because the modeling does not pick up what happens with the land regarding the tangible changes that are occurring because of flood, like the change in the landscape, vegetation, etc. And that's one example. And then another example is the use of traditional plants. When the use of traditional plants by indigenous peoples to make medicine, that's a science. Indigenous peoples know when to pick these plants. It's not just whenever they feel like it. They have to be, they need to go by the seasons, and they have to be a certain color. They have to have a certain texture. When they make the medicines, they know exactly what to put in the potion, I'll call it, for lack of a better word. And there's different measurements, like they know the heat it takes to get a certain texture, to get a certain color. Sometimes they dry them and then they pound them, and they have to feel a certain way. And they can't be picked from a human area. It has to be far away from the woods, far from contamination, and that's the same thing with the pharmaceutical companies making the artificial medicines. They have a formula, and that's the same with the indigenous science regarding medicinal plants. They have a formula, and regarding modern sustainability practices, the indigenous way is looking towards the next 7 generations. It's always about that, and we call that Pimajisiwin. And it's about looking after what's here. I'm looking after the lives of the present. And that's a difference between Western science and indigenous science, the next 7 generation. And with indigenous peoples, they only take what's needed. They don't take more than they need. And I guess regarding the opportunity, I think many universities within Canada, at least, they're starting to hire more indigenous scholars. like especially in the sciences, and that's where I am with the University of Calgary. The University of Calgary is really progressing. I'm bragging about them because that's where I am. But that's a start, and that's what's needed. And that's where progress is going to take place when we start to recognize the sciences, and not just Western science, but the different sciences that are out there.
Yeah. I really appreciate you sharing this perspective, Dr. Ballard. I think this idea of stewardship, of responsibility for the land and the water, is something that resonates with me really deeply. I'm also thinking a lot about sustainability and like the sustainability as a paradigm that like assumes consumption, still overconsumption even. So it's like what can we trim back without really changing the ways that we operate as a global society run by corporations. So definitely a lot to chew on. I appreciate it very much, Dr. Ballard. I want to ask a few more questions. As I get ready to load up this question, I would love for folks who are joining us in the chat or in the Q&A function to share some more questions for Dr. Ballard and Dr. Sylak-Glassman that we'll be pivoting to questions from the audience here in just a moment. But before we make that pivot, I have a question for you both. I'm wondering if you could share some success stories from communities or organizations with whom you've worked. Dr. Sylak-Glassman, would you like to start?
Sure, and maybe the caveat that I'll give first is that in the role that I serve currently, I don't get to work directly with communities, but our programs do a lot of fantastic work to support scientists and community members working together, and so it's a pleasure to get to share some of that work. And maybe just to connect to a point that Dr. Ballard made that I think is a really, really important one, bringing a lot of different types of knowledge together, I can't overstate the importance of that. And a lot of what we hear communities trying to get at is about this really complex interplay between different systems that are you can't look at they're inseparable in certain ways, but the information may have been very compartmentalized. But it's about understanding these interconnections where you can get really deep insight, and you often need to be working directly with local community members who see a place over time to get all of that information. There's really no substitute for it, and that kind of nuanced understanding for how decisions get made. So what you said, Dr. Ballard, really resonates a lot in terms of, I think, what I've also seen in terms of what makes projects successful. So I think right now I've been seeing some really interesting and fruitful work around communities trying to explore what if scenarios related to environmental changes that they're seeing. So they may be facing extreme heat. That's a thing that a lot of urban communities around the country are facing, and it's can have very significant health impacts. And communities want to know, what if they made certain interventions? How would that impact the community? And so there's a great project that's going on called Heat Smart. I believe that's going on with North Kansas, which is a partnership to help create more resilient industrial communities. There's also some fantastic work that's been going on we have a disasters program that's been working with Tufts University and the American Red Cross, and they're looking at a range of communities across the whole United States to look at long-term projections for the environment, and then trying to figure out where are communities putting in adaptation policies that might not be that aligned with what the precipitation is going to look like, what the heat is going to look like. So I think all of these, what a lot of this work comes down to is like information and a dialogue with communities, and helping think about different options for how people can work with the environment that they have. So I think that work has been really exciting to me because it does take that conversation and a lot of listening between different partners. Where you can't just say like, here's the information, your number is 12. Well, the number 12 doesn't really get me anywhere. What should I do, right? And what if I was planning to do this other thing? And what if the thing that this doesn't materialize? What happens then? So I think that's the kind of iterative work and planning work that I've been really excited about.
I love that. It just sounds like so many opportunities for success and so many opportunities to begin imagining success as the future unfolds. So rich. Um, thank you so much. Dr. Ballard, I'd ask you the same question. What are some success stories that you can share from communities you've worked with?
Um, Indigenous people in Manitoba, where I'm from, they have the Seal River Water Initiative, which is spearheaded by Indigenous people. And last year, they signed an agreement where between Indigenous people, so the province, the federal government, and a few NGOs to protect the Seal River watershed area because it's important to keep an area free from development, free from dams, etc. When I say dams, they're the artificial dams that we all know about, not the beaver dams, which are good for the environment, because we have to learn from the beavers when we manage water. Those are a few, plus within Canada too, we have the Indigenous Guardianship program, where Indigenous people are stewards of the land, so they're recognized as such. Those are a few that I can think of at the top of my head. Plus, there's Indigenous people that have their NGOs as well to protect and to conserve the lands, etc.
Thank you, Dr. Ballard. I'm so glad to hear that we're seeing these successes on both fronts in terms of opportunities to retain stewardship of the land, protect the land, especially as these projects are led by Indigenous people. For the last of our group questions, before we pivot to some questions generated by our audience, I'd ask you both, again, starting with Dr. Sylak-Glassman, what advice would you give to aspiring leaders who are passionate about making a difference in their communities?
This was a really fun question to think about, and I feel like when I was trying to collect some notes, there were so many different directions I kind of wanted to take this one. I mean, I think the first thing I would say from my own experience of figure out what is the thing that gets you excited to go to work in a given day. So for some people, it's the mission. For some people, it's the colleagues. For some, it's about autonomy. For some, it's about the like day-to-day activities. It varies for a lot of different people. And there are a lot of different pathways that can work depending on what drives you. And so I think first kind of taking that moment to reflect is really good. And then I would say talk to people and learn and listen. Talk to people about what their jobs, about what their concerns are, about what they need help with. Um, and so I think that for me, like I had tons of, I mean, throughout my career, I've had tons of like informational interviews where I just try to understand um what people are trying to do and why it matters to them and what others could do. The other thing I would say, I think there are lots of ways that you can make positive change just by like being the person that shows up and is willing to do work. There are a lot of people with good ideas, but there are less people who both have a good idea and are willing to put in the effort and are willing to stick with something. And I think if you're willing to do those three things, like show up, keep showing up, and work at something, there are a lot of people that will open up and say, like, oh, actually, could you help me with this? I have this thing I need some help with. And we sometimes talk about like who's willing to take the shovel, right? Like I need a hole dug. Let's start digging. And so I think that's a really important part about helping a community. And I would also say there are so many ways you can define a community that might, like, maybe it's geographic for you, maybe it's about where you live, maybe it's about a faith-based organization, maybe it's about a school that your kids go to, maybe it's about a shared affinity. And so I guess I would also think broadly about what I think probably each one of us could draw some overlapping circles with lots of different communities. Um, and again, start showing up and offering to help and listen.
Mm. Pick up a shovel
Yeah.
and listen. I think that's the way that you distilled that so neatly. Is a skill, Dr. Sylak-Glassman.
Thanks.
Dr. Ballard, a similar question. What advice would you give to aspiring leaders who are passionate about making a difference in their communities?
The advice that I would give is being an Indigenous person, the work that I do, the passion I have for the work, is learn about Indigenous science. And because Indigenous science is more than just it's the passion that you have. For example, the model that I developed, the framework that I developed is three-eyed seeing. And it's about Western science, Indigenous science, and our relations. These are three disciplines working together. These are three eyes working together. With our relations, it means the animals, the plants, the trees, the water, everything. Because they're alive too. When you cut off the tree, you kill the tree. When you take oxygen out of the water, you kill the water. So we have to give. They have a voice, and Indigenous peoples recognize that voice. They hear that voice. So Indigenous people speak for our relations, and we have to learn that we have to respect water. We have to learn what water is saying in Canada and around the world. Certain places we have a water that was given personhood because of and the destruction of the waterways, where water is given a legal entity to have a voice in the court systems and to be able to speak for themselves. And it's the Indigenous peoples that will speak for the water because they will hear what the water is saying. And then that's the third eye, that's a three-eye seeing. And within the Indigenous component within that framework, we have the natural law, we have the traditional law, we have the creation law, we have the language law, and these are very important. When I talk about the language law, I mean the words within my language, Anishinaabe, that were named for the places and spaces and the role within the ecosystem. Like we have specific names regarding the role of water, and that's the way they're named based on the role of the ecosystem. And once we start to understand that, we can identify the changes that occurred from the original naming to the present. And that's the work that I do, and that's what I want to teach the younger generation.
I love that. I think there's so much to learn from this notion, this correct notion that the water has personhood, and translating that personhood from its absolute existence to a legal framework to suddenly combat and battle corporations and other entities who will use that system, the legal system, to change the water, to damage it potentially. I think that's so powerful. We're close to wrapping up this panel session. I'm again grateful for both of your time. late in this evening. Dr. Ballard, a question has come through from our participants asking about more about that braiding notion and that weaving notion between Indigenous science and Western science. And I'm wondering if you could offer an example, perhaps, of a moment or an example of that weaving or that braiding being done, and what you learned from that.
Yeah. If you want to Google Indigenous science, if you want to Google it, Indigenous science at Environment and Climate Change Canada. In 2002, I was approached by the federal government, Environment and Climate Change Canada, to start up the what they said Indigenous Knowledge Division. And I said, yes, I can do that, but it has to be Indigenous Science Division. And then I explained why it should be Indigenous Science Division. So I started the Indigenous Science Division from zero to where it is today. And if you look it up, and the vision that I had was the bridging, braiding, and weaving of Indigenous science and Western science. Bridging meaning, like, for example, there's a river. You have to build a bridge to connect. So one side is the Indigenous science, the other side is the Western science. So you have to connect first. Braiding refers to like the two streams. They'll always be different, but you can start to braid them where they can start working together. Weaving refers to how you start to weave the knowledge systems when you start to do the research in working the knowledge systems together. For example, reports, research, publications. That's where you start to weave the two knowledge system to produce something that's going to work.
That I think those.
And I believe the website is on there. Yeah.
Yeah, I've I think that paradigm, I think is really, to borrow a phrase from the youth that I mentor, it's really juicy. There's a lot to think about, to chew on. This notion of braiding and weaving and bridging, I think, offer, it seems like, three distinct but related ways of relating, of bringing together and making stronger in that process. And I think your work is foundational. Is super important to building the futures that we need to survive what's to come. Our next question is for Dr. Sylak-Glassman. Kanush in the chat asked, how can we instill these qualities that you discussed? The willingness to pick up a shovel, the willingness to listen. How do we instill those qualities at folks in a young age, so we have a future filled with more innovative and insightful STEM communities?
Ooh, I feel like so I'm a parent of young children. I feel like this is like a question I struggle with. Like, how do we have young people expect to dig in? And I think a lot of young people do, and but part of it is making everyone feel a part of a community and feel capable. So I think sometimes people don't dig in because they don't know if they're qualified, or they don't know that they're going to be good at it. And I think part of it is modeling the expectation that everyone can participate and is expected to participate, and it's okay if that participation looks different for different people. And so I do think that modeling respect, but also expecting great things goes a long way. Um, and I also think there, I do feel like there are still so many barriers to people feeling at home in STEM, and that's something that I think about, and I reflect about how, every time I got bad grade on a quiz or a test when I was young, I thought maybe I'm not supposed to be here. Maybe this is a club that I'm not supposed to be a part of. And so I also think it's about normalizing different strengths and weaknesses and that all being acceptable. And it's about normalizing failure as part of a pathway that everyone's going to be a part of. Um, Normalizing that not every PhD is going to be an incredible success. Sometimes it's just people slogging through hard research and it'll go somewhere or it won't, and that maybe is a little bit up to you, but mostly is luck. So there's, I have so many thoughts here about just making this place feel a little bit more welcoming for everyone, and saying like hard work is important, and that gets you a lot of the way there.
Hmm. I need that on the t-shirt. Hard work is important and it gets you a lot of
But if anyone has tips, I mean, please, I am all ears and I will bring it into the parenting part of my life as well.
I don't know much about being a parent, but I am an educator. My PhD is actually in education.
Oh, wow.
I would offer that joy is vital.
Yeah.
Play, self-exploration, without boundaries or repercussions or a goal even, can generate so many of the capacities that we want young people to have, young adults to have, anyone to have, as well as the desire to try and fail. I think so much of our trying that young people do is associated with a grade when things are new. Um, Getting them outside of that, trying because it's
Yeah.
funny, or trying because it's hard, and you know that it is, and you want the challenge, I think is some of the ways that we can build those capacities, um, those predilections, if you will, in young people. But what do I know?
That's a really beautiful point, and I think it may also connect. Dr. Ballard, I'm really curious about your thoughts here because I feel like so much of the education I got in science was about memorizing facts, and it feels very separate from like the joy of exploring a place and exploring nature and the wonder around that. And I'm really curious if you have any ideas of how we bring that into how we teach young people about the natural world.
Yeah, I think that's a difference between indigenous and Western science. Indigenous science is more land-based. It's on the land versus the classroom where you're just memorizing stuff, regurgitating information. And with indigenous science, it's about learning from oral. You're not encouraged to write, but you have to listen, because when you listen stories, when you listen what is being taught you about the land orally, where you're not expected to write, you comprehend more and you maintain that knowledge for a lifetime. It stays with you. Whereas when you read something, you read a book, you just remember what it's about. You don't remember every paragraph, every chapter of the book verbatim. Nobody does that. But with indigenous science, it's experiential, and that's the difference. And I think that's the beauty of indigenous science, because you're there on the land, learning. And when I talk about indigenous science, I'm not talking about ancient science, because indigenous science is real-time science. It's constantly evolving, changing. It's not static. It's the present time, what we're experiencing now. And that's what I'm talking about. It's not ancient. It's not traditional. It's now.
I need that on a t-shirt too. I feel like I've learned so much from you both, and I'm so grateful that you were able to make time to educate us, educate these participants. on your ways of knowing. And I'm curious, as we begin to wrap up here, if you have any final remarks or thoughts that you would like to leave us with, Dr. Sylak-Glassman, I will start with you.
I'll just say it gives me such hope to see this community gathering. And I feel I'm so honored to get to have been a part of this and to get to meet both of you. Dr. Ballard, your work is just so incredibly impressive. I can't imagine starting that department from scratch, and I'm just wowed, and I'm so hopeful by all of just the enthusiastic comments in the chat of people having great ideas for how to do new things together. I'm gonna think about this small language model idea as well. We have a lot of people thinking about AI currently. So I just I'll just end with my gratitude and hope for this group going forward.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sylak-Glassman. Dr. Ballard, how about you? Any closing remarks for us, for the group?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I'm really happy that you asked me to join this panel. And I think NASA can learn a lot from Indigenous science because before the use of satellite, telescopes, GPS, Indigenous people just looked at the stars to navigate their way across the country, across the oceans. And I think NASA could learn from all of that because it still exists today. The way I was taught, my mother taught me looking outside what the sunset looks like. We can determine the weather for the next week, and that's a knowledge that's instilled in me, like the way the leaves sound in the summertime, rain is gonna come, early fall, all of that knowledge is instilled in me, and I'm so happy to have that knowledge, both worlds, where I walk comfortable in both. Yeah.
Comfortable in both. I have done it before and I'll do it again. Thank you both so much for joining us tonight. I want to give both of you, I want to honor your time. I know that we said about 9:30 Eastern that we would release you of your bondage here, supporting the Space Apps Collective. We're going to turn for a few minutes to do some reflection with the folks on the line here. You all are welcome to join, but if you have to get on to other things in your evening, we can completely understand. What I would love to do is give folks opportunity to thank you, Dr. Ballard, Dr. Sylak-Glassman. In the chat, folks, please, please, please add your appreciation, your thank yous, so we can let these folks know all of the ways that we learned from them today. In fact, I like to do that in a more interactive way. I'm going to put a link in the chat here to Mentimeter, where you can create a much more engaging, active representation of your thanks. So please use a QR code to scan for your phone or enter the link that's in the chat, where we'll start to populate some of these thanks here in just a second. Wow. As these things come in, I see them in various languages. Folks feel reassured, engaged. Folks felt the love. Dr. Sylak-Glassman and Dr. Ballard. Your insights, your deep knowledge was a grace in our presence tonight. Thank you, thank you. We can't thank you enough. Again, speakers, feel free to hang out with us as we continue to reflect, but if you need to take your leave, we completely understand. With that, I want to ask folks on the line to take a moment and reflect Since the theme of the day is action and community, let's think together. What's one thing that you will do to bring back to your community as a result of this panel? I already see some answers coming in. What are some things you will do or bring back as a result of this panel? I see some answers coming in. Folks have said peace and to get rid of biases, research on Indigenous science and knowledge to understand it more, to come to the Globe event tomorrow at 3:15. Continue to think about how we can help the land heal. I would extend that. Something I'm thinking about is how we can help the air heal, the water heal, and what our world is in harming it. Listening and observing more of the natural world, looking to citizen science opportunities. These are awesome examples. I think these are all actionable items. These are all things that we can do, maybe tomorrow, in our communities, to really take what we've learned today and turn it into action. Our next question, I want to think about how all of you are resources for one another. I'm wondering if folks can share in this Mentimeter link, what are some sustainability initiatives that you're working on and that you're inspired by? Let's take this opportunity to share some resources, share some perhaps websites, some programs, some tools around sustainability that you are working on or that you're inspired by. I've seen some folk interested in green tech and composting. This reminds me I need to get my recycling bin from outside. Reuse and recycle, reducing. I'm thinking a lot about my, personally, I'm thinking a lot about my my clothing shopping and making sure that I'm buying products that are gonna last. I think we're in this fast fashion moment where people buy things to wear one time and then dispose of them, which cannot be healthy. Coding in Python as a sustainability initiative is a little bit above my intelligence level, but I'm confident that there's a connection here. Computer science for humanity and environmental science, NASA STEM, absolutely. Dark sky parks and initiatives, absolutely. I think both in terms of preserving our view of the sky and, from an energy conservation standpoint. The NASA Open Data Portal, exploring more, absolutely. Getting to know our world, getting to know our planet at a local level can only help us be more invested in protecting it. The Hydroponic Garden, ISS, is inspiring, as well as the Methuselah's desire to find closed loop systems that recycle space waste, such as turning waste into compost into fertilizer. That's such a great idea, such an amazing example. I think there's so much more reuse that we can do in our everyday lives. I hope folks continue to engage in this conversation around sustainability initiatives that you're working on, inspired by. Please don't be ashamed to turn to the chat to consider some of these opportunities and some of these options. I'm beginning to reflect on the day we've had. Starting about 1 o'clock this afternoon, we were mesmerized, beginning with a wonderful keynote from Mr. Tom Whitmire, who talked a lot about what's possible here at NASA, as well as around the world as technology advances. He talked a lot specifically about blockchain, about digital ledgers, but as he concluded his talk, he reflected that we don't even know all the things that are coming down the pipeline for us. It's incumbent on us. It's our responsibility as a global community to be ready, to learn, to stay on top of cutting edge technologies, and to be curious about what we can do to intervene, to be adamant about finding ways to intervene. We heard from wonderful panels of NASA subject matter experts who shared their perspective on doing citizen science, on the various ways we can get involved. And one thing I'm taking away from that panel is the importance of each of us as individuals, right? Our specific perspectives, our positions, our subjectivities are incredibly vital resources for NASA science. Just as satellites look down, for example, on the clouds, it's our responsibility, our opportunity to look up from the ground, to supplement, to help triangulate that data. We heard from an incredible set of lightning talks from our collective cohort, 4 incredible individuals, driven, brilliant, who shared the ways that they're using NASA open source data and projects through the collective cohort this year. I'm thinking particularly of teacher Carly's incredible open source, accessible math lessons, foundational approaches to doing science that can only help to educate the youth more effectively and begin to create the future that we want to see. Of course, in this panel we just witnessed on making a difference through collective wisdom, we learned about how citizen science can help bring local communities into the conversation, how vital it is for folks to be involved on the ground level at the beginning of project development to ensure that their needs are met. We heard from Dr. Ballard about how Indigenous science isn't new, is becoming increasingly accepted, and is present, is evolving, is right now, and ought to be respected as such, as a complement, as a compatriot to Western or modern quote unquote science. Of course, we heard from you all, sharing amazing and curious questions in the chat, sharing resources with one another, sharing links with one another, and helping us learn from you about all the things that we can do to empower our communities. Thank you again to all our speakers. Thank you again to our wonderful community. I'm looking over some data. We had almost 200 participants in the keynote today, going on 100 in this late panel was late here for me. Some of you incredibly early in the morning, and we're so grateful that folks were able to join us. Now, I hope you're not tired of Collective Genius Summit programming, because we have lots going on tomorrow. We're beginning in the morning with a panel with Global Space Agency partners from around the world, and another panel in the afternoon with emerging leaders in space sciences. That first panel with Global Horizons Perspectives from Space Exploration from 10 to 11 tomorrow will be joined by representatives from NASA in the United States, Bahrain, South Africa, and Brazil. Immediately following that, we'll engage in a workshop by the Applied Remote Sensing Training Program, or ARSET, who's going to help us understand how to use some of NASA's open source resources. At the same time, we'll have the first of our connection sessions, where you get an opportunity to network and learn alongside some of the folks who are here on the call today. After a break, we will start to hear from another sort of expert, some brand new NASA scientists in training, who will talk about pathways to careers in space science. These are folks who are about to complete a PhD or have just completed a PhD, who will talk some about their journey, some of what they've learned, and some of how you can begin to follow in those footsteps. The day comes to a close with, as you've heard, another workshop from Globe, who will talk about and give us some hands-on practice using the Global Observer app that they use to help citizen scientists not only use NASA data, but contribute to NASA data. And we're so excited to have them. At the same time as that workshop session, we'll also have a second of our 2 connection sessions. Again, a great opportunity for you to meet with, learn from, engage with other folks in the collective community. We'll of course finish our day with some brief closing ceremonies and another opportunity to celebrate our collective cohort. As always, please look to the welcome guide for more details about these sessions. And lastly, the connection board, which will be shared in the chat as well, will be open throughout the summit for you to populate ideas, projects, and asks from our summit community. This board, as mentioned, will inform our connection sessions taking place tomorrow. So please be sure to add in your ideas, your questions, your topics of interest so that we can help you get organized around those tomorrow. Our line will be open until the top of the hour if people want to connect over chat or ask any questions, etc., from our summit navigators. As mentioned, we will reconvene tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. UTC. Ciao for now. Thank you so much for joining us. Take care. We'll see you soon.